Welcome back. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 interconnected horror stories set in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, Canada's smallest province, where winter isolation and ancient secrets merge into something truly terrifying. These stories are based on alleged true events, folklore, and the kind of mysteries that small coastal towns keep buried under ice. But before we begin, please consider subscribing and don't forget to like and share with your friends. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced something unexplainable in a small town. Thank you all for your support. The morning Gerald Boudreau disappeared, the temperature in Charlottetown dropped to -28 degrees Celsius. His wife, Marie, reported him missing when he failed to return from his regular ice fishing spot on Hillsborough Bay. Gerald was 53, methodical, and had fished those waters every winter for 30 years. He knew the ice. The RCMP found his truck at the access point, engine cold, driver's door slightly ajar. His fishing gear sat arranged on the ice, auger, tip-ups, tackle box, all positioned with Gerald's characteristic precision. The hole he drilled was still open, black water visible beneath. What disturbed Constable David Chen wasn't the abandoned equipment. It was the ice itself. Around Gerald's fishing hole, someone had carved symbols into the frozen surface. Not crude scratches, but deliberate markings, each about 6 inches across, forming a perfect circle around the opening. Chen photographed them before the wind could drift snow over the evidence. Later, when he showed the images to Dr. Helena Carver at the university, she went pale. "Where did you find these?" she asked. Chen explained about Gerald Boudreau. Dr. Carver studied the photographs for a long moment, then pulled out a book from her shelf, a collection of Mi'kmaq folklore and early European settler accounts from Prince Edward Island. "These symbols," she said, pointing to similar markings in a 19th century illustration, they were used as warnings. Markers for places where the boundary was thin. Boundary between what? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she told him about the old stories, about certain places along the coastline where fishermen refused to drop their lines, where ice formed differently, where people claimed to hear voices rising from the water. Superstition mostly, but the symbols were real enough, documented in multiple historical sources, always associated with disappearances. Chen returned to the site 3 times over the following week. The symbols remained visible despite fresh snowfall, as if the ice refused to cover them. Other fishermen had abandoned the area entirely. One old-timer, Louis McLeod, told Chen he'd seen lights beneath the ice the night before Gerald vanished. Not the diffuse glow of a flashlight, but something that moved with intention, tracing patterns below the surface. Gerald wasn't the first, Louis said, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Back in '89, 3 people went missing from this same stretch. Different spots, but all within a mile. They stopped talking about it after a while. Easier that way. Marie Boudreau held a memorial service in March. Gerald's body was never recovered. The RCMP file remained open but inactive. Chen kept copies of the photographs in his personal files, along with a growing folder of historical newspaper clippings about disappearances along Charlottetown's waterfront, a pattern stretching back over a century, clusters of vanishings separated by years of silence, then suddenly resuming. The week after Gerald's memorial, Chen interviewed a teenager named Marcus Holloway who'd been night skating on the harbor. Marcus claimed he'd seen someone standing on the ice near the old Confederation landing, a figure that didn't move despite the wind, wearing what looked like outdated clothing. When Marcus skated closer, the figure had simply vanished. Not walked away. Vanished. Chen added the report to his growing file. That night, unable to sleep, he drove to Hillsborough Bay. The symbols were still there, faintly visible in his flashlight beam. He photographed them again, noting that they appeared darker now, as if the ice around them had absorbed something. Standing there in the crushing silence of a winter night, Chen heard it, a low vibration coming from beneath the ice, rhythmic and almost musical. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds before stopping abruptly. He waited, but it didn't return. When he mentioned it to his partner, Constable Andrea Walsh, she gave him a strange look. "My grandmother used to talk about the singing ice," she said. "She grew up in Victoria by the sea. Said there were winters when you could hear it calling, and those were the winters people disappeared." Chen researched every disappearance he could find in the archives. The pattern became clearer. Clusters of vanishings, always in winter, always near water, always preceded by reports of unusual sounds or lights. The last major cluster had been in 1989, just as Lewis MacLeod mentioned. Before that, 1967. Before that, 1943. The intervals were shortening. Marcus Holloway stopped returning Chen's calls. When Chen visited his home, Marcus's mother said her son was staying with relatives in New Brunswick for a while. He's been having nightmares, she admitted. Says he sees that figure everywhere now. In windows. At the end of hallways. Always in the corner of his vision. Dr. Carver called Chen in late March with new information. She'd found references to a practice among early settlers. Something the Mi'kmaq had warned them against. Certain families, desperate during harsh winters, had made bargains at the ice. Offerings in exchange for safe passage, for fish, for survival. But the offerings had become darker over time, and the ice had developed an appetite. They stopped around 1840, she said, or claimed to. But there are hints in church records, oblique references to penances and confessions. Families who left suddenly. Children who went missing. You think it's connected? I think Gerald Boudreau wasn't fishing alone that morning. I think someone was waiting for him. The symbols on the ice finally disappeared in early April when the thaw began. Chen visited the site one last time and found something lodged in the slush, a small metal tag, the kind used on fishing equipment. It had been scratched deeply with what looked like the same symbols from the ice. The tag belonged to Marcus Holloway. The building at 147 Victoria Street had stood vacant for 3 years before Jonathan Reed signed the lease. He was new to Charlottetown, transferred from Halifax for work at the provincial archives, and the rent was half what he'd expected. The landlord, an elderly man named Arthur Gallant, had been almost too eager to rent. Just needs someone living in it again, Arthur said, handing over the keys. Buildings get lonely. Jonathan thought it was an odd thing to say, but dismissed it. The apartment was spacious, 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, tall windows overlooking the street. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, Arthur explained. Family emergency. Furniture and all. The first week was unremarkable. Jonathan settled in, arranged his books, established routines. The building was quiet. He seemed to be the only tenant, though Arthur insisted others lived there. They keep to themselves, he said. On the 8th night, Jonathan woke to footsteps in the hallway outside his door. Slow, deliberate steps that paused directly outside his apartment. He waited for a knock that never came. When he finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. But the carpet showed wet footprints leading from the stairwell to his door, then stopping. Not continuing past. Just stopping. The water wasn't melted snow. It had a brackish smell, like harbor water. Jonathan called Arthur, who seemed unsurprised. Old building, he said. Pipes sometimes leak. But Jonathan had checked. No water damage. No leaking pipes. The footprints dried by morning, leaving faint salt residue. He began noticing other things. The living room was always colder than the rest of the apartment, even with the heat turned up. Sometimes he'd hear breathing from the 3rd bedroom, the one he used for storage. When he investigated, the sound would stop. Once, he found the door to that room open despite having locked it. And inside, someone had arranged the moving boxes into a perfect circle. Jonathan researched the building's history at the archives where he worked. The records were sparse but disturbing. 147 Victoria Street had been a boarding house in the 1920s, catering to fishermen and dock workers. In January 1943, 4 residents disappeared over the course of 2 weeks. No bodies, no explanations. The house was sold, converted to apartments, but tenants rarely stayed long. One notation caught his attention, a police report from 1989. A resident named Catherine Mills had called repeatedly about intruders, about someone entering her apartment at night. She'd changed the locks 3 times. The reports stopped abruptly in February. Catherine Mills was one of the people who'd vanished that winter, part of the cluster Constable Chen was investigating. Jonathan found Catherine's belongings were still in the apartment. The furniture Arthur claimed the previous tenant had left. He checked the lease documents. The last tenant before him had been Catherine Mills, but the dates didn't match. She'd disappeared in 1989. It was now 2024. When he confronted Arthur, the old man's demeanor changed. You need to complete the circle, Arthur said quietly. In the 3rd room. Keep the boxes arranged properly. It's the only thing that holds them back. Holds what back? The ones who come from the water. The ones who accepted the bargain. Arthur left before Jonathan could ask more. That night, Jonathan heard voices in the hallway, multiple people whispering urgently in a language he couldn't identify. The wet footprints appeared again, but this time they came from under his bathroom door, which opened onto nothing but a solid wall. He checked the bathroom. Water was seeping from the baseboards, pooling on the tile. When he touched it, his fingers came away smelling of deep ocean, of things long submerged. Jonathan broke his lease the next morning. Arthur returned his deposit without argument, seeming almost relieved. The building needs someone, he said again. But not everyone is suitable. A week later, Jonathan saw a missing person poster at a coffee shop. Marcus Holloway, age 17, last seen near Victoria Street in late March. The photograph showed a thin teenager with frightened eyes. Jonathan called the number on the poster and reached Constable Chen. They met at a Tim Hortons downtown. Jonathan explained about the apartment, about Arthur Gallant, about the footprints and voices. Chen listened intently, taking notes. Arthur Gallant has owned that building for 40 years, Chen said. Every few years, someone new moves in. Most leave quickly. A few. He paused. Did you know Marcus Holloway? No, but I think he might have been in my apartment. Chen showed him another photograph, an evidence photo of symbols carved into ice. Does this mean anything to you? Jonathan felt cold recognition. I saw those. Scratched into the hardwood floor of the third bedroom, under where the boxes were arranged. They drove to 147 Victoria Street together. Arthur wasn't there, but Chen had a warrant. The apartment looked different, furniture covered in dust, as if it hadn't been occupied in years. But the third bedroom was exactly as Jonathan remembered. The boxes formed a perfect circle around symbols carved deep into the floor, identical to those Chen had photographed on the ice. At the center of the circle was a single wet footprint. Dr. Helena Carver took the same walk every evening, 3 miles along the Confederation Trail, from her home near UPI to the outskirts of the city and back. It was her meditation time, her chance to process the day's work. Even in winter, especially in winter, when the trail was empty and silent under snow. She'd been studying the symbols Constable Chen had shown her for weeks now. The more she researched, the more disturbed she became. The markings weren't just Mi'kmaq warnings. They were older, predating any known indigenous tradition on the island. Some scholars theorized they'd been brought by Norse explorers. Others suggested an even more ancient origin. What troubled Helena most was their purpose. They weren't warnings to stay away. They were invitations. She was thinking about this on a Tuesday evening in late March when she noticed footprints in the snow beside the trail, fresh prints that hadn't been there on her outbound walk 20 minutes earlier. They paralleled the trail for about 50 feet, then cut directly into the woods. Helena had a doctorate in anthropology and a practical New Brunswick upbringing. She knew better than to follow strange tracks into the woods at dusk. But these prints were unusual, bare feet in snow, which should have been impossible in this cold. Yet they didn't show signs of frostbite injury, no dragging or stumbling. Just calm, purposeful steps. She followed them for 30 feet into the tree line. They stopped at a small clearing where someone had drawn symbols in the snow, the same marks from the ice, from the apartment floor, rendered in precise lines. At the center of the pattern sat a small object wrapped in cloth. Helena knew she should call Chen. Instead, she carefully photographed the scene, then unwrapped the object. It was a journal, leather-bound, pages brittle with age. The first entry was dated January 15th, 1840. The families have agreed. The offerings will continue, though we must be more careful now. The missionaries grow suspicious. But the ice demands payment, and without it, we cannot survive these waters. Helena took the journal. The footprints, she noticed, now led away from the clearing in a different direction, toward the city, not away from it. She followed them back to the trail. They stopped at the edge of the pavement, pointing toward downtown Charlottetown. That night, Helena read the entire journal. It had belonged to a woman named Eleanor Cairns, wife of a fishing fleet captain. Eleanor documented a practice among 7 founding families of Charlottetown, an arrangement made during the brutal winter of 1839, when starvation seemed inevitable. They performed a ritual at the ice, offering something precious to ensure their survival. It had worked. The fish came. The families prospered. But the ice wanted more than fish in return. Every 19 years, it demanded payment. A life, willingly given, walked into the water. If the payment wasn't made, the ice took what it wanted, multiple lives, seemingly at random, always in winter. The last entry was dated February 3rd, 1840. They came for Eleanor last night. I understand now why she wrote this down. Someone must know. Someone must continue. The families have made their choice. We will not break the bargain. But future generations must understand the cost. Helena checked the dates. 1840, 1859, 1878. The pattern held for decades, then seemed to stop in the early 1900s. Had the families broken the bargain? Or had they simply hidden it better? She cross-referenced with Chen's disappearance data. The clusters didn't match the 19-year pattern. They were irregular, increasingly frequent. Unless the bargain had been broken, and now the ice was taking payment whenever it chose. The next evening, Helena took her walk earlier, while there was still daylight. The symbols in the clearing had been covered by fresh snow, but new footprints led away from the site, heading deeper into the woods. She didn't follow them. Instead, she visited the provincial archives, where Jonathan Reed worked. She'd met him briefly when he'd called about the Victoria Street apartment. He was researching the same historical families she was, the founding families of Charlottetown. 7 families, Jonathan confirmed, pulling out record books. Cairns, MacLeod, Gallant, Boudreau, Walsh, Holloway, and Carver. Helena felt ice in her stomach. Carver, your family, I assume? They were among the earliest settlers. Prosperous fishing and shipping interests. He paused. There are gaps in the records, though. Whole years where no births or deaths were recorded for these families. And every 19 years, at least one member of each family line died or disappeared. Like clockwork, until about 1908. Helena thought about her grandmother, who'd spoken of singing ice. About her great-great-grandfather, who'd supposedly drowned in Hillsborough Bay in 1897. About her own mother, who'd left Prince Edward Island suddenly when Helena was a child and never returned. What happened in 1908? She asked. Jonathan showed her a newspaper article. In March 1908, during the worst winter storm in decades, 7 people had walked onto the ice together and vanished. The families claimed it was a tragic accident. They'd been searching for a lost child. But witness accounts were strange. The 7 had walked in formation, arms linked, directly toward a section of ice marked with symbols. They'd shown no signs of distress. After that, the disappearances stopped for decades. Then 1943, then 1967, then 1989, now 2024. 35 years, not 19, Helena said. The bargain changed. She drove to the Confederation Trail access point that evening, parked, and walked toward the clearing. The sun was setting, temperature dropping fast. She found fresh footprints, multiple sets now, all barefoot, all leading toward the trail. At the clearing, someone had rebuilt the symbol pattern in the snow, larger this time. At its center stood Marcus Holloway, alive but changed. His skin had a gray cast, his eyes reflected light like an animal's. "Dr. Carver," he said, his voice hollow. "They're waiting for you." "Who's waiting?" "The families. All of us who've accepted. The ice keeps us. We serve it now, help it find the others." He smiled, showing teeth too white, too perfect. "Your name is called. You're the 7th. Helena ran. Behind her, she heard Marcus laughing, or perhaps it was the wind through the trees, or something older. She reached her car, drove home, locked every door. That night, she heard footsteps outside her house. Wet footprints appeared on her porch by morning. The symbols had been traced in frost on her windows. She called Chen and told him everything. Constable David Chen had stopped sleeping properly in February. The Gerald Boudreau case had metastasized into something he couldn't categorize in official reports. Missing persons with no bodies, no witnesses, no rational explanations. Just patterns, historical, geographic, genealogical patterns that suggested something both impossible and undeniable. His partner, Andrea Walsh, had stopped helping. After Chen showed her the family connections, her own surname among the founding 7, she'd requested reassignment. Before she left, she'd given him a single piece of advice. "My grandmother said if you investigate too deeply, they notice you." Chen didn't believe in they. He believed in evidence, in logical explanations. But his evidence kept pointing toward the illogical. He'd compiled everything into an unofficial case file he kept at home. 37 disappearances since 1840, all connected to 7 family lines, all occurring in winter near water. The symbols appearing before each cluster. The 19-year pattern that had shifted to 35 years. And now, Marcus Holloway missing. Jonathan Reed's disturbing account from Victoria Street. Helena Carver's discovery of Eleanor Cairns's journal. Chen wasn't from one of the 7 families. His parents had immigrated from Hong Kong in the 1990s. He was an outsider to whatever this was, which meant he could see it clearly, or so he hoped. After Helena's call, Chen assembled what he knew. 7 founding families. A bargain made in 1839. Offerings every 19 years, then later every 35. The last collective offering in 1908, 7 people walking onto the ice together. After that, the pattern had shifted. Instead of willing sacrifices, the ice took at random, but still limited itself to the 7 family lines. Unless someone broke the pattern. Unless someone refused. Chen spent 3 days cross-referencing genealogical records. Every person who'd disappeared belonged to one of the 7 families, even distant descendants who'd moved away and returned. The ice, or whatever it was, tracked bloodlines. He found Arthur Gallant's address. Not the building on Victoria Street, but a small house near the harbor. When Chen arrived, the door was unlocked. Inside, the walls were covered with maps, photographs, family trees. Arthur had been tracking this for decades, documenting every disappearance, every connection. On the kitchen table lay a handwritten note. Constable Chen, you're not bound by this. Leave the island. Do it tonight. The cycle is accelerating. It won't stop until it has all 7. AG. Chen called Arthur's number. No answer. He checked with the RCMP dispatcher. Arthur Gallant had been reported missing that morning. His car was found near the Confederation Trail. Keys in the ignition, driver's door open. That night, Chen met with Helena Carver at a coffee shop in downtown Charlottetown. She looked exhausted, haunted. I've been hearing them, she said. Voices outside my window. Footsteps. I think my grandmother might have known about this. She left the island in 1989, the last major cluster. She told my mother to never come back. But you came back. For work. 5 years ago. I didn't know. She trailed off, staring past Chen toward the window. Chen turned. A figure stood outside on the street, watching them. Marcus Holloway. His face was pressed against the glass, breath fogging despite the cold night. Then he smiled and walked away, his bare feet leaving wet prints on the sidewalk. Chen ran outside, but Marcus had vanished. The footprints led toward the harbor, then simply stopped mid-stride. Back inside, Helena was shaking. I found something else in Eleanor's journal. There's a way to break the bargain, but it requires someone from each family line to refuse together, to stand against it at the source. The source? Where it started, where the first bargain was made. She pulled out a map, marked with coordinates. Here, a specific point in Hillsborough Bay, where the water is unusually deep, where the ice forms strangely. Chen knew the spot. It was where Gerald Boudreau had been fishing, where the symbols had appeared on the ice. We need representatives from all 7 families, Helena continued. Willing participants who understand the cost. If we refuse collectively, if we break the pattern together, it should end. Should? The journal isn't clear. Eleanor died before she could finish the entry. But it's our only option. Chen started calling. He tracked down descendants. Lewis McLeod, the old fisherman who'd witnessed lights under the ice. Sarah Boudreau, Gerald's daughter. James Cairns, a marine biologist. Andrea Walsh, his former partner. Helena Carver herself. All agreed to meet. But they were missing representatives from 2 families, Gallant and Holloway. Arthur was gone. Marcus was changed. 3 nights later, Chen received a call. Marie Boudreau, Gerald's widow, had seen Marcus Holloway standing outside her house. He'd knocked on her door at midnight, leaving wet footprints on her porch, and said, "Tell Chen the ice is waiting. Tell him to bring the families. We'll be there too, all of us who've gone before." Chen assembled the group on a Saturday morning in early April. The ice was beginning to thin, but it would hold for another week, maybe 2. They drove to the access point, walked out onto the frozen bay, following GPS coordinates to the exact location where Gerald had disappeared. The symbols were still there, carved deep into the ice, now surrounded by dozens of other markings. The accumulated signs of decades, perhaps centuries, of bargains and offerings. At the center was a hole in the ice, water black and impossibly deep. As they approached, figures emerged from the tree line. People they recognized from missing person posters, from old photographs. Marcus Holloway, Catherine Mills, others, older, wearing clothes from different eras. All walking toward them across the ice, silent, purposeful. Gerald Boudreau was among them. Sarah Boudreau cried out, started forward. Chen grabbed her arm. "That's not your father anymore." The figures stopped 10 feet away, arranged in a circle around the living group. Gerald stepped forward, his voice wrong, layered with other sounds. "You can refuse," he said, "but understand the cost. The bargain protects you. Without it, the ice takes everyone, not just the families. Everyone who lives here." "That's a lie," Helena said, though her voice shook. "Is it?" Gerald gestured to the assembled figures. "We volunteered, each of us, in our own time. We walked onto the ice willingly to save others. The ice is patient. It's willing to wait 19 years, 35 years. But if you break the bargain entirely, it will take what it's owed all at once." "What does it want?" Chen demanded. "To cross over. To walk among you. To exist beyond the water." Gerald smiled with teeth too white. "It's almost strong enough now. A few more cycles. But if you refuse, if you deny it the slow path, it will take the fast one." The ice beneath them groaned, a deep vibration that Chen felt in his bones. Cracks appeared, spreading from the central hole. "Choose," Gerald said. "Continue the bargain, or face what comes after." James Cairns had studied the waters around Prince Edward Island for 15 years, but he'd never taken measurements at the coordinates Helena Carver specified. The location was considered navigationally insignificant, decent depth, stable currents, unremarkable in every scientific sense. Except that fish avoided it. James had noticed this in tracking data. Migration patterns curved around this specific point, sometimes adding miles to their routes. Lobster traps placed nearby came up empty. Even seabirds seemed to skirt the area. He'd always assumed there was a thermal gradient or chemical anomaly he hadn't detected yet. After the meeting on the ice, after the ultimatum Gerald Boudreau's revenant had delivered, James returned to his lab. He needed data, needed something rational to hold on to. The ice creatures, he couldn't think of them any other way, might understand metaphysics, but James understood oceanography. He spent 3 days analyzing historical data from that location. Temperature readings went back 50 years. Salinity tests, current measurements, all normal on the surface, but there were gaps. Certain readings were missing, not corrupted or lost, but deliberately excluded from datasets. Dates removed from sequences. Measurements that someone had redacted. James found the original physical logs in storage, handwritten observations from research expeditions in the 1960s and 70s. Many pages had been torn out, but a few entries remained. Anomalous sonar returns from depth. Equipment malfunction suspected. Recommend avoiding area for future studies. Another, dated February 1967, recovered unusual biological samples from 47 degrees 3 minutes north, 63 degrees 7 minutes west. Tissue structure unlike any known marine species. Dr. Patterson insists on destroying samples. AM overruled. Dr. William Patterson had been James's predecessor, his mentor for the first 2 years of his career before Patterson retired abruptly. James had always thought it odd. Patterson had loved his work, seemed the type to die behind a microscope. Instead, he'd moved to British Columbia, as far from the ocean as he could get, and refused to discuss his research years. James called him. The phone rang 8 times before Patterson answered. "Don't," Patterson said immediately. "Don't what? Whatever you're calling about. If it involves those waters, if it involves the families, don't." I broke my silence once, in 67. Took samples. Tried to understand. It noticed me, James. It sent things to my house. I heard them at night. My wife left me. My daughter won't speak to me. I got out only because I'm not from here, not from the families. But it remembered me. It still remembers me. What did you find in those samples? A long silence. Then, not fish tissue. Not animal. Something older. The cell structure was wrong. Organized in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing. The DNA sequencing made no sense. It was as if I was looking at biology that operated on different rules. What happened to the samples? I burned them. All my notes. Everything. And I still dream about them, James. I still hear the singing. The call ended. James spent that night reviewing every scientific anomaly he could find associated with the bay. There weren't many. Researchers seemed to unconsciously avoid the area, or their funding dried up, or they got reassigned. The pattern of absence was itself significant. He decided to take his own samples. Not from the surface, but from depth. The hole the ice beings had shown them supposedly connected to waters far deeper than the bay should allow. James had sonar equipment that could verify this. 2 days later, he returned to the ice with his graduate student, Emma Chun, no relation to the constable. The ice was thinner now, dangerous, but James had worked in worse conditions. They drilled through near the marked location, fed the sonar probe down. The readout made no sense. According to the equipment, the water beneath them dropped over 300 meters. Impossible, given that Hillsborough Bay averaged 30 meters at its deepest. James recalibrated. The reading held. Either his equipment was malfunctioning, or there was a massive submerged chasm directly beneath them. Dr. Cairns, Emma said, staring at the sonar screen. Something's moving down there. James looked. The sonar showed a shape rising from the depths, massive, moving with clear purpose. It was ascending toward them. We need to leave, James said. They packed quickly, but not quickly enough. The ice beneath them groaned, cracked. Water geysered up through the drill hole, splashing onto the surface, and James caught a glimpse of something in the water. Not flesh, not scale, but something that moved between solid and liquid, that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. They ran. Behind them, the ice shattered. When James looked back, the crack was spreading, moving faster than seemed natural, pursuing them. They made it to shore as the ice gave way, a section the size of a football field collapsing into water that churned and roiled. At the water's edge, Emma screamed. Something was emerging. Figures pulling themselves onto the ice that remained, more than the handful that had confronted them days earlier. Dozens now, perhaps hundreds, stretching back into the water. James and Emma drove away. That night, James received an email from his department head. Funding for his marine research was being terminated. Effective immediately. No explanation beyond budgetary constraints. His lab access was revoked the next morning. Chen called him that afternoon. They're forcing us out, Chen said. Andrea Walsh was suspended today. Helena Carver was asked to take medical leave. They're isolating us. Who's they? I don't know. But someone doesn't want us investigating this. Chen paused. Or maybe something doesn't want us investigating. James told him about the sonar readings, about the thing rising from the depths. Chen was quiet for a long time. We need to meet, Chen finally said. All of us. Because I found something in Arthur Gallant's house. Documents about the families. There's an eighth family. One that refused the bargain in 1840. One that was removed from the records, wiped from history. Eleanor Cairns mentioned them in her journal. The family that said no. What happened to them? According to Arthur's notes, Chen said, they all drowned. Every member. 23 people in one night. The other families covered it up, removed them from town records. They were called the Morrison family. And I think they're the ones under the ice now. I think they're what's been taking people all these years. Not some ancient force, but the ghosts of the family that refused. James felt cold realization spreading through him. The thing rising from the depths wasn't abstract. It had faces. Dozens of faces pressed together. We need proof, Chen said. Something we can take to authorities, to media, something undeniable. But James knew there wouldn't be proof. The systems protected themselves. The families had maintained this secret for nearly 2 centuries, and they had resources, influence. Anyone who got too close was removed, not killed, just isolated, discredited, forced out. That night, figures appeared outside James's house. He recognized some from photographs, people who disappeared in 1989, in 1967, in earlier years. They didn't approach, just stood at the tree line, watching. Among them was Dr. William Patterson, who James knew was alive in British Columbia. But here he stood, pale and wrong, at the edge of James's property. James didn't sleep. By morning, the figures were gone, but wet footprints covered his porch, his driveway, the path to his door. Sarah Boudreau couldn't accept that her father was gone. The thing on the ice that wore his face, that spoke with his voice, it couldn't be him. Gerald had been kind, rational, afraid of nothing except losing his family. He wouldn't have made a bargain that cost his life. But the more Sarah investigated, the more she understood that her father might not have had a choice. She worked as an administrative assistant at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Access to medical records was restricted, but Sarah knew the systems, knew how to search without leaving obvious traces. She started pulling files on the disappeared, everyone from the 7 families who'd vanished over the decades. A pattern emerged in the weeks before their disappearances. Each person had visited the hospital or a clinic, complaining of similar symptoms. Auditory hallucinations, specifically hearing voices from water sources. Faucets, showers, rain. Voices that called their names, that whispered in languages they didn't understand. Sleep disturbances. Vivid dreams of drowning, of swimming in darkness, of something ancient waiting at the bottom of the bay. Doctors had diagnosed anxiety, stress, prescribed antidepressants. But the symptoms always escalated. The patients would become fixated on the harbor, on ice fishing spots, on places where the water was deep and dark. Within weeks, they'd disappear. Sarah's father had visited his doctor 6 times in the 2 months before he vanished. Complained of hearing singing in the shower, of dreams where he walked across the bay floor, breathing water like air. The doctor had referred him to a psychiatrist, but Gerald never attended the appointments. Sarah pulled more records, going back years, decades. The pattern held. Every disappearance was preceded by these symptoms. And in each case, the attending physician was either from one of the 7 families or had worked at the hospital for over 20 years, which meant they knew. They'd seen the pattern. They'd said nothing. She found her father's last medical record. His final doctor's visit had been 3 days before he disappeared. The notes were brief. Patient continues to report auditory phenomenon. Has expressed intent to answer the call. Advised strongly against. Patient appears resigned. Recommended notification to family contacts per protocol. But Sarah had never been contacted. No one had warned her that her father was planning to walk onto the ice. She confronted the doctor, Dr. Michael McLeod, age 67, who'd been practicing in Charlottetown for 40 years. One of the founding families. Your father understood his obligations, Dr. McLeod said quietly. They were alone in his office after hours. As you will in time. What obligations? The Boudreaux line has provided 8 times since the bargain began. Your great-great-grandfather in 1859. Your great-aunt in 1916. Your father continued the tradition. When your time comes. My time. Dr. McLeod looked at her with something like pity. You've been hearing them, haven't you? In the pipes. In the rain. They've been calling you since your father walked onto the ice. It passes down, Sarah. When one answers the call, the next in line begins to hear. Sarah's hands went cold. She had been hearing things, whispers when she showered, voices in storm drains. She'd attributed it to grief, to stress. But they'd started the morning after her father disappeared. There are medications, Dr. McLeod continued, that can delay it. Dull the voices. Your father took them for 2 years before he finally accepted. Some manage 5 years, even 10. But eventually, everyone answers. The alternative is worse. What alternative? Refusing. Letting it take you unwillingly. He pulled out a file, showed her photographs from 1989. Catherine Mills tried to resist. She lasted 3 months. The things that came for her weren't gentle. She begged to be allowed to walk onto the ice by the end. Sarah left his office and went directly to Chen's apartment. He was there with Helena Carver, James Cairns, and 2 others she didn't know, Louis McLeod and Emma Chun. Dr. McLeod is part of it, Sarah said, shaking. The doctors know. They track who's hearing the voices, who's being called. They document it like it's a disease, but they're really just recording the harvest schedule. Helena nodded grimly. I've been going through Eleanor Cairns's journal more carefully. The bargain wasn't just about offerings. It was about breeding. The families agreed to maintain their bloodlines on the island, to never let the lines die out. Each generation produces the next group of potential offerings. They manage it like livestock. How do we stop it? Sarah asked. We can't, Louis McLeod said. He was crying. My son started hearing the voices last week. He's 23. I thought we had more time. But the cycle is accelerating. It used to wait 19 years between calls. Now it's taking people every few months. James Cairns stood, pacing. The thing I saw arising from the depths, I've been researching it. There are similar phenomena in other places. Deep lakes, ocean trenches, places where the geology is unusual, where water goes deeper than it should, always accompanied by disappearances, always tied to old families, old bargains. It's not unique to Charlottetown. So there are more of these things? Emma asked. Or it's all the same thing, James said. Connected through underwater channels we haven't mapped. Growing stronger with each feeding, spreading. Chen had been quiet, studying a map covered with markings. Arthur Gallant's documents mention a failsafe, something the Morrison family, the 8th family that refused, tried to do before they drowned. They attempted to seal the source, to close the passage between the deep water and our world. It didn't work, obviously. They all died. But Arthur thought he'd figured out what went wrong. Where's Arthur now? Sarah asked. Under the ice, Chen said flatly. I found his body yesterday. The RCMP hasn't released it yet, but I saw him during the recovery. He'd carved symbols into his own chest, different from the others. Symbols that looked like they were meant to repel, not invite. It didn't work, Helena said. No, but in his notes, Arthur wrote that one person can't seal it. It requires a sacrifice from each family line simultaneously, all 7 walking into the water at the same moment, at the exact point where the deep water rises closest to our world. A permanent offering that would satisfy it completely and close the passage forever. The room fell silent. That's genocide, Emma finally said. 7 people dead. 7 people versus everyone, Chen replied. Because that's what's coming. James's sonar showed it's massive now, feeding on decades of offerings, growing. Eventually, it won't need to call people. It'll be strong enough to take them. To take all of us. Sarah felt the weight of impossible choices. She thought about her father walking onto the ice, about Marcus Holloway's changed face, about the hundreds of figures pulling themselves from the water. There has to be another way, she said. But looking at the others' faces, she saw they didn't believe that. Outside, it began to rain. Sarah heard voices in the water hitting the windows, calling her name. Emma Chen wasn't from Charlottetown. She'd come for graduate school, planning to study marine ecology for 3 years before moving on. That was before the investigation, before she'd seen something rising from the depths that her scientific training couldn't explain. Now she was trapped, not physically, but bound by knowledge, by responsibility. She couldn't leave while this continued. So she did what she always did when facing impossible problems. She researched. The Morrison family had been erased thoroughly. No census records, no property deeds, no church registries. It was as if they'd never existed. But erasure is never perfect. Emma found references in unexpected places. A maritime shipping manifest from 1839 listing a Morrison as a crew member. A property survey from 1840 that showed a building where the modern library stood, attributed to M. Family Holdings, defunct. The library had been built in 1843, 3 years after the Morrisons supposedly drowned. Emma requested the original architectural surveys from the provincial archives. Jonathan Reed helped her access the restricted documents. The building had been constructed on top of an existing foundation, unusual for the time, suggesting something had stood there before. The architectural notes included a curious detail. The basement had been filled with concrete before the library was built, sealing whatever had been beneath. They buried something, Emma said, spreading the documents across Jonathan's desk. The Morrison house. They destroyed it, filled in the basement, built over it. What? Jonathan examined the plans. Because something was down there. Something they wanted to make sure stayed buried. They requested access to the library basement. The head librarian, an elderly woman named Patricia Walsh, refused. That area is unsafe. Structural concerns. It's been sealed for decades. But Patricia Walsh was one of the 7 families. She knew. That night, Emma and Jonathan broke into the library. It wasn't difficult. Old building, simple locks. They brought flashlights, crowbars, and a sense of desperate necessity. The basement door was in a maintenance corridor, marked with warnings about asbestos and structural damage. The lock had been reinforced recently, suggesting someone still cared about keeping people out. Jonathan forced it open. The stairs descended into darkness that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams. At the bottom, they found the concrete barrier, a wall that sealed off the original basement, poured thick and reinforced with steel. But time had cracked it. Water had seeped through, creating gaps. And someone had been widening those gaps deliberately. Fresh tool marks scored the concrete. Someone else had been trying to reach whatever lay beyond. Through the largest gap, Emma shone her light into the sealed space. She saw stone walls, old timber supports, and something else, symbols carved into every surface. The same markings from the ice, from the apartment floor, but hundreds of them, overlapping, filling every inch of stone. They were trying to contain it, Emma said. The Morrisons. They knew what the other families had done, and they tried to seal it in their basement. Why their house specifically? Jonathan asked. Emma studied the layout, comparing it mentally to the maps Chen had shown them. Because this is where it started. The Morrison house was built at the exact point inland from where the deep water rises closest to shore. The other families made their bargain at the ice, but the passage, the actual connection to wherever that thing comes from, it opens here, under this building. They heard water then, flowing somewhere beyond the concrete. Not rain or plumbing, but something that moved with rhythm, almost like breathing. A voice emerged from the darkness beyond the barrier. Emma Chun, not one of the families. You shouldn't be here. It was Marcus Holloway's voice, but wrong, echoing as if from a great distance. Emma turned her flashlight to the gap. She saw movement, something pale pressing against the opening from the other side. The Morrisons tried to seal us in, Marcus said. They carved their symbols, spoke their words, poured their concrete. It held for a while, but water always finds a way through. And we're patient. We've been seeping back into the world, drop by drop, year by year. Soon the barrier will fail completely. What are you? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. We were like you once. The Morrison family. We refused the bargain, so the ice took us all. 23 people in one night. But we didn't die. We changed. We became the first servants, the first harvest. Everything that came after, all the others who've joined us, they serve the same purpose. We're building something. A bridge between the deep places and your world. Almost complete now. Jonathan grabbed Emma's arm. We need to leave. But Marcus wasn't finished. You think you can stop it? Reinforce the seal? The Morrisons were blood relations, empowered by their refusal. They had strength you don't possess. And even they failed. What makes you think you can succeed? Maybe we can't seal it, Emma said, thinking fast, buying time. But we can expose it. Tell everyone. Make it public. You've survived this long because of secrecy, because the families keep it hidden. What happens when thousands of people know? When researchers come, media, government investigators. Marcus laughed, a sound like water draining. The families have resources. Influence. Anyone who threatens exposure has accidents. Gets discredited. Goes missing. How do you think this has remained hidden for 2 centuries? He was right, Emma realized. She and Jonathan were expendable. 2 graduate students making wild claims about monsters under the library. Who would believe them? Who would investigate before they disappeared? But you've given me an idea, Marcus continued. Thank you, Emma. Jonathan, you've shown us that people are curious, that they might discover this place. We should relocate. Find a new access point. The harbor, perhaps. Or the hospital. Somewhere more accessible. The concrete cracked audibly. Water spurted through the gaps, pooling on the basement floor. In the water, Emma saw movement. Shapes forming, multiple figures pressing toward the barrier. They ran. Behind them, the concrete groaned, pieces falling away. Emma heard splashing, footsteps in water, multiple figures climbing through the widening breach. They reached the main floor as water began flooding up the stairs. Jonathan locked the basement door, but they both knew it wouldn't hold. Emma called Chun as they fled the building. The barrier is breaking, she said. Whatever was sealed under the library is coming through. We need to evacuate the city center. I'll try, Chen said. But Emma, I'm being suspended. They came to my apartment an hour ago. Administrative review. They're taking my badge, my access. Andrea Walsh disappeared this afternoon. Dr. McLeod's office burned down tonight with him inside. They're removing anyone who knows too much. Who's they? The families. Or something controlling the families. I don't know anymore. Everyone from the 7 lines who hasn't been taken yet. They're either helping it, or they're too terrified to resist. We're alone in this. Emma and Jonathan sat in his car outside the library, watching. Nothing emerged from the building. No water, no figures. But Emma could feel it. A presence spreading outward, seeping into the city through pipes, through drains, through any channel where water flowed. It's not going to manifest openly, she said. Not yet. It's still building strength, still spreading through the water systems. When it's ready, when the bridge is complete, that's when it'll show itself. How long do we have? Emma thought about the sonar readings, about the mass rising from the depths, about 2 centuries of offerings feeding something ancient and patient. Days, maybe less. The rain continued. Emma heard voices in it now, not calling her name, but speaking in unison, a chorus growing louder with each drop that fell. Constable David Chen was no longer a constable. His badge and weapon had been confiscated. His investigation files were seized. Officially, he was on administrative leave pending an inquiry into inappropriate conduct during an investigation. The RCMP wouldn't specify what conduct. He didn't care about the badge anymore. He cared about the 5 people gathered in his apartment, the only ones who understood what was coming and hadn't yet disappeared or died or joined the things under the ice. Helena Carver, Sarah Boudreau, James Cairns, Emma Chun, Jonathan Reed. Not enough. They needed representatives from all 7 families to attempt Arthur Gallant's proposed solution, simultaneous sacrifices to seal the passage. They had only 2, Helena Carver and Sarah Boudreau. Lewis McLeod had vanished 2 days ago. Patricia Walsh was helping the other side. The Gallant, Cairns, and Holloway lines had no willing participants left. "We can't complete the ritual," Helena said flatly. She looked exhausted, her face gaunt. "Even if we believed it would work, we don't have enough people from the bloodlines." "Then we find another way," Chen said, though he had no idea what that might be. James spread photographs across the table. Images he'd taken of the water near the library, near the harbor, near every place where disappearances had occurred. In each photograph, barely visible, were shapes beneath the surface. Faces. Dozens of faces pressed together, forming something larger. "It's not individual entities anymore," James said. "If it ever was. It's becoming one thing, one consciousness built from all the people it's taken. The Morrison family was just the beginning. Now it's hundreds of minds merged into a single purpose." "What purpose?" Emma asked. "To cross over completely. To exist on land as it exists in water. It's been building a body for itself, piece by piece, person by person. When it has enough, it won't need the water anymore. It'll walk among us." Sarah made a sound like a sob. "My father is part of that thing. His mind, his memories, absorbed into it." "All of them are," Helena said quietly. "Everyone who's been taken. That's why they come back to call others. They're not individuals anymore. They're mouths of the same creature, speaking its will." Chen thought about Gerald Boudreau on the ice, about Marcus Holloway at the library, about all the figures he'd seen standing at the edges of the city, watching with eyes that reflected light wrongly. Not people anymore. Pieces of something vast and alien wearing familiar faces. "The documents Arthur left," Chen said. "The failsafe wasn't just about sealing the passage. It mentioned containment. He believed the Morrison family had partially succeeded. They'd limited it, constrained it to specific access points. That's why it could only manifest near water, why it needed to call people rather than taking them directly. The seals are still working, but they're failing. So we reinforced them," Jonathan said. "With what?" "The Morrisons used symbols, rituals, their own blood. We don't know the specifics. And we don't have anyone from the Morrison line left. They were all absorbed in 1840. Emma stood, pacing. "We're thinking about this wrong. We're trying to fight it on its terms. Blood sacrifice, family lines, ancient bargains. But it exists in water. It's fundamentally a physical thing, not purely supernatural. James proved that with his sonar. It has mass, it has volume, which means it follows physical laws." "Where are you going with this?" James asked. "The deep water it comes from. According to your sonar, it's a massive underwater cavern connected to the bay through a narrow channel. What if we collapsed that channel? Sealed it physically, not mystically. Cut off its access to our waters. That would require explosives," James said slowly. "Precisely placed. We'd need to know the exact geology, the location of the channel. I have the sonar data. I know where it is." Chen felt a spark of hope, dangerous and desperate. Could it work? James considered. Maybe. If we used enough explosives, placed correctly, we could cause a landslide that would block the channel. But it would need to be complete. Any gap would allow water through, and water is all it needs. "Where do we get explosives?" Sarah asked. They all looked at each other. Chen knew what they were thinking. This would be illegal, dangerous, possibly futile. But what else did they have? There's a construction site on the North Shore, Jonathan said. They're doing blasting for a new development. The explosives are kept in a trailer, secured, but not impossibly so. That's theft, Chen said automatically, then almost laughed at himself. Sorry, old habits. We'd need someone who knows what they're doing, Emma said. Underwater demolition isn't simple. Sarah spoke quietly. My cousin worked in offshore construction. Underwater welding, demolition. He's in Alberta now, but I could call him. Explain. Would he believe you? He's a Boudreaux. He's heard the stories, even if he doesn't believe them. And he heard the voices before he left the island 10 years ago. He'll understand. They planned through the night. Emma and James would map the exact location. Sarah would contact her cousin. Jonathan and Chen would acquire the explosives. Helena would research any mystical component they might need. Symbols to place, words to speak, anything that might reinforce the physical seal. It was desperate, improvised, probably doomed. But it was something. As dawn broke, Chen looked out his window. Figures stood in the parking lot below, motionless in the rain. He recognized Andrea Walsh, Arthur Gallant, others he'd seen in photographs of the disappeared. They were watching, waiting. They know what we're planning, he said. Helena joined him at the window. Of course they do. They're listening through every pipe, every drain. They hear us whenever we're near running water. Then why let us try? Because they're confident. Or because... She trailed off, staring at the assembled figures. Or because they want us to try. Maybe the explosion will break the seals entirely. Maybe we're about to do exactly what they've been waiting for. Chen felt cold certainty settle in his gut. Then we don't have a choice. If doing nothing means they eventually break through, and doing something might break through faster, at least action gives us a chance. The figures below began to move, walking away in unison, their wet footprints gleaming in the morning light. At the street corner, they turned back as one, and Chen saw Gerald Boudreaux among them. Gerald raised his hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or a warning, then disappeared around the building. 3 days, Emma said, checking her calculations. That's how long we have to plant the explosives and detonate. After that, according to the tidal charts and James's data, there's a spring tide that will bring the deep water closer to the surface than it's been in decades. That's when it will try to cross over completely. 3 days to save a city, or to doom it faster. Chen looked at the others. 5 people against something ancient and vast, armed with stolen explosives and desperate hope. Let's get started, he said. Sarah's cousin, Michael Boudreaux, arrived from Alberta within 36 hours. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors in harsh conditions. He listened to their explanation without interruption, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled up his sleeve, showing a tattoo on his forearm. The same symbols Chun had photographed on the ice, rendered in dark ink. I got this the day I left the island, Michael said. I'd been hearing them for 6 months. The voices, calling me to the water. I knew if I stayed, I'd end up like my uncle, like your father, Sarah. I ran, got as far from the ocean as I could. Worked in landlocked Alberta for a decade. But I still dream about the water. Still hear them sometimes in my shower, distant now, but never gone. He looked at each of them. If you can seal it, if you can make it stop, I'll help. Whatever it takes. They moved fast. Jonathan and Chun had acquired 40 pounds of industrial explosives from the construction site, enough to cause significant damage if placed correctly. Michael studied James's sonar data, calculating precise positions for charges along the underwater channel. It's deep, Michael said, 80 meters at the narrowest point. We'll need diving equipment, and someone will have to place the charges manually. Remote deployment won't work. The positioning has to be exact. How long to place them? Emma asked. In these conditions, with the cold water, limited visibility? For hours minimum. Maybe 6. And that's if nothing goes wrong. Something will go wrong, Helena said. She'd been researching continuously, cross-referencing Eleanor Cairns's journal with other historical accounts. The Morrison family tried something similar in 1840. They attempted to seal the channel with rocks and debris. It didn't work because the thing actively defended itself. It sent the taken ones to interfere. They'll do the same to us. Then we need a diversion, Chen said. Something to draw them away from the channel while Michael places the charges. Like what? Chen thought about the figures watching from the shadows, about how they'd been present but passive, as if waiting for something. They want more offerings, more people from the family lines. What if we gave them what they want, or made them think we were? You mean use ourselves as bait? Sarah asked. The 6 of us go to the original site, where Gerald disappeared, where the symbols were carved. We perform a ritual, make it look like we're attempting the 7 family sacrifice Arthur described. While they're focused on us, Michael goes deep and places the explosives. That's suicidal, James said. Probably. But they'll come for us in force if they think we're trying to complete the old bargain. That gives Michael time. Michael studied the plan, calculating. I'd need 8 hours minimum if I'm working alone underwater. Can you hold their attention that long? We'll have to. They spent the next day preparing. Helena gathered materials for the ritual, candles, salt, items belonging to the disappeared. Emma mapped escape routes from the ice. James constructed a remote detonator with a 2-hour delay. Enough time for Michael to surface and get to safety, but not so long that they could be stopped. The night before, Chen couldn't sleep. He sat in his apartment reviewing everything they knew, looking for flaws in the plan. There were dozens. Any single point of failure could doom them all. His phone rang at 2 a.m. Unknown number. Constable Chen, said a voice he recognized, Gerald Boudreau, but layered with others, speaking in harmony. We appreciate what you're attempting. The explosion will indeed collapse the channel. It will also shatter the remaining Morrison seals. The resulting surge will flood every waterway in the city. We'll be free to flow anywhere water reaches. Every home, every building, unrestricted access. Is that what you want? Chen's mouth went dry. You're lying. Are we? Ask Helena Carver about the consequences of breaking a seal improperly. Ask her what Eleanor wrote about forced breaches. The line went dead. Chen called Helena immediately. Tell me about breaking the seals. She was silent for a moment. I didn't want to mention it because we don't have any other options. But yes, Eleanor wrote that violent breaches could backfire. The seals don't just contain, they direct. They force the entity to use specific pathways. If we destroy the main channel without proper precautions, we might just give it access to every water source in the city simultaneously. Why didn't you tell us? Because what's the alternative? Do nothing and let it break through anyway? At least this way we're taking action. Chen wanted to argue, but she was right. They were in a position where every choice led to catastrophe. All they could do was choose which catastrophe they had the best chance of surviving. The next morning, they loaded Michael's diving equipment into Jonathan's van. The explosives were packed carefully, waterproofed, ready for placement. Michael ran through the plan one more time, his voice steady despite what they were asking him to do. Once I'm down, radio silence, he said. The charges have to be placed in a specific sequence. If even one is positioned wrong, the whole thing fails. I'll set the timer when the last charge is in place. Then I surface and we get as far inland as possible before detonation. How far inland? Sarah asked. 5 miles minimum. If it goes wrong, if it causes flooding, the surge could reach 3 miles from the harbor in the first hour. They drove to the access point in silence. The ice had thinned significantly, but Michael assured them it would hold his weight near the edge. The deeper water was what concerned him. The cold, the pressure, the things that waited below. Chen and the others walked out onto the ice, carrying their ritual materials. They could see figures gathering at the tree line. Dozens of them now, maybe hundreds. The taken ones, watching and waiting. At the center, where Gerald had disappeared, the symbols were still visible, darker now, almost burned into the ice. Helena began arranging candles, speaking words from Eleanor's journal. Emma stood with James, both trembling from cold and fear. Sarah held a photograph of her father, tears freezing on her cheeks. Chen watched the figures advance slowly across the ice, forming a circle around them. At the shore, Michael slipped into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. The diversion had begun. Michael Boudreau descended into darkness, his diving light cutting a narrow beam through water that seemed thicker than it should be. At 20 meters, he began seeing shapes, debris, he thought at first. Then he realized they were people, or what had been people, suspended in the water like specimens in formaldehyde. Their eyes were open, watching him pass. He focused on his instruments, on the coordinates James had provided. The channel was real, a massive underwater fissure that split the bedrock, leading down into depths his equipment couldn't measure. Water flowed from it with unusual force, warm despite the surrounding cold, carrying a smell like deep ocean trenches. At 60 meters, he reached the first placement point. The explosive charge was small but powerful, designed to fracture rock in a specific direction. Michael secured it to the channel wall, triple-checking the position. 1 down, 5 to go. Something brushed against his leg. He spun, light sweeping the water. Faces surrounded him. The suspended figures had moved, forming a sphere around him at a distance of perhaps 10 meters. They weren't swimming, just floating, positioning themselves to watch. Michael tried to ignore them, moving to the second placement point. The faces followed, maintaining their distance, silent observers. He could see their mouths moving in unison, speaking words he couldn't hear through the water. On the ice above, the taken ones closed their circle around Chun and the others. Gerald Boudreau stepped forward, his movements fluid. Wrong. You understand this won't work, he said. The channel is the passage we use by choice. But we exist in all the water, everywhere. Blocking one path just forces us to use others. Then why are you here? Chen asked, buying time. If it doesn't matter, why try to stop us? We're not stopping you. We're witnessing. Gerald smiled with too many teeth. You're about to do something unprecedented. Destroy a passage that's existed for thousands of years. We want to see what happens. Helena continued her ritual, arranging symbols, speaking words in Mi'kmaq that she'd found in Eleanor's journal. She didn't believe it would work, but it had to look convincing. They needed to keep the things occupied for 8 more hours. The Morrisons tried to seal us in, Gerald continued. They used their own blood, their own lives. 23 people died to create those barriers. Do you know what we did with them? We absorbed them, made them part of us. They were the first, the foundation. Everything we've taken since has built upon their sacrifice. They didn't seal us, they fed us. Sarah stepped forward, still holding her father's photograph. Is any of him left? Any of who he was? We all remain. Every memory, every thought, every fear. We're a collective consciousness now, all of us who've accepted the water. Your father is here, Sarah. He's part of what I am, part of what speaks. He wants you to know it's peaceful. That joining us is inevitable. That resistance only delays the wonderful moment of surrender. He would never say that, wouldn't he? He walked onto the ice willingly. He answered the call. He understood that some things are larger than individual survival. As you will, when your turn comes. At 75 meters, Michael placed the third charge. His air was running low, his body temperature dropping despite the wetsuit. The faces surrounding him had increased in number. He counted at least 50 now, pressed together like a living wall. He recognized some from photographs Sarah had shown him. People who'd disappeared decades ago, preserved perfectly in the deep water. One face separated from the others, drifting closer. Catherine Mills, missing since 1989. Her mouth opened, and somehow, impossibly, Michael heard her voice. We don't want you to destroy the channel. We want you to widen it. Michael placed the fourth charge, hands shaking now from cold and terror. 2 more to go. The explosion will fracture the bedrock, Catherine continued, her voice coming from all the faces at once. The channel will collapse, yes, but the surrounding rock will crack. New pathways will open, smaller, more numerous. We'll flow through them into every aquifer, every water table, every underground stream. You're not sealing us out. You're giving us unlimited access. Michael didn't respond. He couldn't. The depth was affecting him, pressure and cold combining with nitrogen narcosis. He felt drunk, disconnected. The faces were beautiful now, inviting. He understood why people had walked onto the ice. It would be so easy to remove his regulator, to breathe the water, to join them. 5th charge placed. 1 more. On the ice, the circle of figures began moving inward. Helena's ritual was failing, or perhaps it was succeeding too well, drawing them in. Chun stood with Emma and James and Sarah, forming a smaller circle facing outward. You're running out of time, Gerald said. Your cousin has been down for 7 hours. His air supply is exhausted by now. He's either dead or he's joined us. Either way, the charges won't be completed. But we appreciate the effort. Really, we do. He had an 8-hour supply, Sarah said, though her voice shook. Did he? Or did we damage his equipment before he entered the water? Humans are so easy to mislead. Michael reached the sixth and final placement point at 80 meters. His air gauge read empty, but somehow he was still breathing. The regulator hissed with each breath, drawing from a tank that should have been depleted half an hour ago, unless they'd done something to it. Unless he was breathing water and his oxygen-starved brain was interpreting it as air. He placed the charge, set the timer, 2 hours, checked every connection. His hands looked strange in the diving light, pale, translucent, like the faces surrounding him. "Join us," they said in unison. "Complete the transformation. You're already halfway there. Feel how the water sustains you. Feel how natural it is to breathe here, to belong here. Michael Boudreau, last of your line, accept the call." Michael looked up toward the surface. 80 meters, 10 minutes of ascent at safe speed. But he was out of air, or thought he was, or no longer needed it. He couldn't remember which. He started ascending anyway. At 40 meters, the faces followed, still speaking, still inviting. At 20 meters, he could see the underside of the ice, light filtering through. At 10 meters, he saw figures standing on the surface, Chun and the others, surrounded by the Taken. He surfaced at the edge of the ice, gasping air that hurt his lungs after breathing what might have been water. He pulled himself onto the frozen surface, shaking violently, unable to speak. Jonathan ran to him. "Did you place them all?" Michael nodded. "Timer set. 2 hours. Then we run." They helped Michael to the shore, the Taken ones making no move to stop them. Gerald Boudreau called after them. 2 hours. We'll see you when it happens. When the channel collapses and the new passages open. When we flow into every pipe in this city. When there's nowhere without water, nowhere without us. Thank you for helping us transcend." They drove inland, then speeding through Charlottetown streets. Behind them, figures emerged from the harbor, from storm drains, from anywhere water collected. Hundreds of them now, walking calmly toward the city center.